Hello, everybody. Are here with you today. Well, in the morning in the States, but in the over across the pond in the motherland, we are in almost the late afternoon. So, we've been trying to get this interview because of time difference, and so I put that on myself because Google will lie to you, right? Google will literally lie to you. So, so welcome to the Black Butterfly Podcast. I am co-host Amaru.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Black Butterfly Podcast. You are now in the cocoon room. This is Candace, your host.
And we are here with, there's so much stuff I want to say about her, but I call her Big Sis. She's actually my cousin. I just told her I'm going to start calling you Auntie because you just give those vibes off. But the amazing Toddre Monier. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
It's been funny because I'll get to a lot of that later. Just how influential she is. So before we start our interview, do you have any opening thoughts, Candace or Toddre, before we start?
Well, I just want to welcome you, Toddre, to the show. I know we've been trying for a while to get you on the show. However, like I said, schedule conflicts, time difference, and so we're excited to have you. So if you would just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, introduction, and then we will get started. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again for having me. My name is Toddre Monier, and I'm a California native, and I'm literally living my best life in Nairobi, Kenya. I have a background in African studies, sociology, international human rights law, and I always wanted to live in Africa. I always knew that I would work in Africa, retire in Africa. And one day I looked up and I was living in California. I was not in Africa the way I planned. And so then the universe made some things happen. I wound up in Zanzibar, moved to Kampala, Uganda, and now I'm in Nairobi, Kenya.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So we want to just ask you some questions about your transition to Africa in just a second. Amaru, you have any questions?
No. I know this one very well. So it's just funny because we have a cut. So that's another stuff. But as a kid, I didn't know my father's side of the family. And so my mother used to always talk about America. We would ride past 35th and Broadway where that bank was. She said, your auntie used to work there, but I never knew her, right? So when I finally got to meet her, and I think it was 2019, 20, right before COVID, when my dad passed. He passed in COVID, but I got to meet her. And then the first person she said, "Oh, you got to talk to my daughter, Toddre." And so when I spoke to Toddre on the phone, she was like, "What?" Yeah, she kind of reluctant at first because she didn't know what I was about and whatnot. But ever since that day, we've been like this. And so, and it's been so cool because she has taught me so much. It's literally every time I talk to her, I learn something new. And so these are the people you got to keep around. Like, we got to protect these people because, they push our culture forward. They push our people forward. And so she is very inspirational. So I love her so much. I love her so much. She's so influential. My 14-year-old wants to wear every hairstyle she has. So she's so cool. So with that said, though, let's move forward because we do have a lengthy interview, but we always start off with the scripture of the day. And Candace, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, so our scripture of today is Exodus, and it is Exodus 14:14. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to be silent. And I actually chose this scripture because I know there is some unrest in the United States. There are people that I know personally that are scrambling to get passports because there's so much happening in wanting to move abroad, whether it is Africa or Asia or just other countries. And so I feel like Exodus was a scripture that I wanted to use today just because of all the things that are currently happening. And if anybody is familiar with the Bible, there is a scripture in the Bible that talks about Exodus when the Israelites were leaving Egypt, I believe. So there you have it.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. Um, as the ticker
There's a
says at
really
the bottom, the
So
amazing
I said that's
Toddre
very
Monier is.
poignant because we also have uprisings in Kenya right now. It's been going on, I want to say 3 weeks. It's been going on like twice a week. People have been taken to the streets. They're trying to depose Ruto, our current president. So even from my apartment, I live near the state house, and I can smell the tear gas. I can hear the military rifles. It's been really intense.
So it's real. That's real. That's the real. Um, so let's just start there. How so? Because that's one of the questions I always have, right? When you talk about politics and voting and all of those things, and then obviously you're talking about protests. How how is that as far like with you being a citizen? But how do Africans take those uh, policies, right? Voting. How do they view it, and then do they even pay attention to American politics? Does that have any effect on anything what's happening in the countries in Africa?
Definitely. I feel like, or I don't even feel, what I know is that developing nations, they are very abreast of what's happening in global politics because the decisions that are made in the so called global north will inevitably affect them. So they really tune in. And unlike the US, where we get like very limited news, MSNBC or CNN, etc., here you get global CNN. Here you get global BBC. You get Al Jazeera. You know what I'm saying? In the US, when you want like for real global news, you have to seek out other sources besides your average everyday nightly news. um, Voting, I I think it depends on the person. It depends on the country. Because like when I lived in Uganda, they've had the same president for over 34 years, and they really wanted him to get out. Like Museveni, they wanted him gone, but it was not safe for people to go to the polls. So most people didn't go to the polls, and those people that did go to the polls, I was told, were beaten. So it's like, yeah, it's real. In a place like Kenya, I believe people do take their votes a bit more seriously, though I haven't been here during an election. However, the last election they had, there was death. There was a lot of ethnic clashing, and a lot of people died. And so yeah, it's just it's tense. But as far as like the politics, like I can't ignore, like, Kenyans know that the world is watching them. Africa is watching them. Other Africans are so proud of Gen Zs. The Gen Zs in Kenya have taken to the streets. And in the US, it's like a one and done. We march, it's over. These kids have been in the streets like twice a week and going to the CBD, the Central Business District, where they're being tear gassed, where kids are disappearing, where they're being beaten, they're being jailed. It's no joke. So yeah, they're heavily involved in politics. And so I have a podcast as well on YouTube, and I'm very careful about what I
Mm-hmm.
say because they will definitely come for you. You know what I'm saying? And they call it KOT, Kenyans on Twitter. Like the way Kenyans be on Twitter, like they serious.
I just want to say that there is definitely a lot globally happening with politics, and here in the United States, I heard you say that it's one and done. I don't think the majority of people of color understand the importance of, um, politics in general. I wouldn't necessarily just voting, but what's happening here in the United States, because Congress is responsible for certain things, Senate is responsible for certain things, and the president is responsible for certain things. But the focus more so is voting in the presidential election, whereas we know that that's just part of it. You have to figure out who is sitting on those seats locally, to determine what's going to happen with the laws in your city and also in your state. And so they're not taught about that. I think that everybody has not everybody, but most people have lost sight of the branches of government and what that actually looks like. Laws have been passed where there are people spending an enormous amount of time in prison, or they're not getting the proper health care or medical care or treatment that they need. And so I think it's very important that we are figuring out who are sitting in those seats and who are going to be there for some of those seats. You sit there until you die, and that's really ridiculous. So we just have to do a better job here locally.
And like one of the things, like when we was talking, when I think about the politics part too, I always think about when COVID first happened, right? Because there was a lot of politicization around that, right? Um, but I recall something that you sent me, which was really interesting. When COVID first happened, uh, they were literally kicking people out of the country, um, who had COVID, who tested for COVID. Um, you remember that? It was like a document you sent, but it was saying something about if you had COVID or suspected to have COVID or something like that, they were literally kicking you out of the country. And so my question is, what was the COVID process like? What was it like being over there during COVID?
Oh, during COVID, I was in Uganda. I was in Kampala, Uganda, and they took a lot of international money.
Mm,
So that meant that they had to adhere to those very strict COVID policies.
mm,
So, for example, private cars were banned because they
mm,
didn't want people spreading COVID, and they said that they didn't have the medical resources in case there was a severe outbreak. So private cars were banned. Public buses, we call them matatus, those were banned. The motorcycle taxis were banned. So the only thing you could do to get around was ride your bike or use your feet. That was all you could do. And they had basically contained us to our neighborhoods. It was
mm,
a wild situation. What I will say is like my body, like that's the best shape I've been in my adult life because I got me a bicycle, and it's a very hilly city. And I was on that bike going up and down the hills. Look, my whole body was just snatched. And it was interesting because people had never seen a woman on a bike.
mm,
So the way people would just stop and stare, and then I had me a little speaker on the front. I had my little music blasting. It, but to be honest with you, when COVID first happened, they thought that it was something that was just happening in Europe and North America.
mm.
So when I would tell people that I was American, they was like, "Oh, your people are dropping like flies," because it hadn't quite hit Africa yet. And I was
Yeah,
like, finally, we were all kind of like, finally, something that doesn't impact Black people. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
And the first cases that they got in Uganda, they were people who were coming back from Dubai. So
Hmm.
the whole, you know, the what was in the zeitgeist was like, oh yeah, COVID exists out there. And the only people in Uganda that have it are the people who are coming from outside the country. And then, Africans are such communal people, very social people. So social distancing, like, what is that? How you
Mm,
telling people to social distance? So like everything was shut down. And I go outside and I just see groups of men just sitting in the grass talking to like people, like everybody thought it was going to be over real quick. So you're supposed to be social distancing. Folks was outside talking to each other, right up on each other, da 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 da. And so then, like as it drive on, you would see in front of stores there would be like a little wash your hands situation, sanitize your hands situation, right? And then they would only let in like a few people at a time into the store. But then once you got in the store, the sales help was just like right up on you. I was like, what's the point? So
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
an interesting time. Folks was still partying. So what people like, you would go to a club and they would just lock you in the club. Because if curfew was at like, if the curfew at one point it was at 7 and then it moved to like 10 and then midnight or whatever, you go to the club and then they just lock you in the club and you spend the night in the club. Not
really.
me, because I cannot. But the way people was inviting me out, and then like if it wasn't a club situation, folks was renting Airbnbs, and then
Mm.
they would stay there the whole weekend and just drink and party. Like, I mean, it was COVID was happening in Uganda, but then it was like it wasn't happening. It was interesting.
Okay.
I was going
I
to ask you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm actually hearing there's another surge of COVID here in the States. It's a new strand.
It's been here. I mean, there's so much to say about it, right? Because Magufuli, who was the president of Tanzania at the time, they're more like socialist than capitalist, and they're right next door.
Mm.
And he was like, this COVID is some bullshit. It's some make believe stuff. And then he came over to Kenya for treatment for something. I don't remember what it was. And then he died. And of course, they said he died from COVID. It was a real scandal. Like the international relations between Kenya and Tanzania were very strained at that point. Um, I remember hanging out with this woman, and she was telling me that she had to go home and work on this proposal for the Bill Gates Foundation because they wanted to test COVID vaccines in Africa. And I was just like, basically, so you're going to sell out your whole country for some money? And she was like, these people have enough money to buy your whole country. There's nothing I can do. So there's a lot of layers to the COVID situation. Um, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
I want to follow up with on that. I do think it's very important, even though there's money involved, and a lot of times people will sell their their whole generation or their whole family for a couple of dollars. There are so many different people in other countries that they could have asked to experiment on. Why is it always people in Africa for experiments? And at some point you have to. All money is not good money. At some point you just have to say
Right.
no. You literally just have to say no. I always tell people you have to lead by example. You first. You try it on your
Right.
on your people
Right.
first, and then we'll look at that and see how that goes, and then we'll make an informed decision. So, money, you can't always say yes to money. You just cannot.
Right. Look at Amber Rose. You know what I'm saying? Look what happened to Chris and Michelle. You know what I mean? I think everybody has their what is it? Everybody has their price. And
Mm-hmm.
some
Mm.
people's price is real low, and some people's price is real high. And this woman that I was hanging out with, she was I would say upper middle class Ugandan. I'm sure she figured like, if not me, it's gonna be somebody else.
Mm.
So why not me and my team get the money?
Mm.
And the other thing that I would tell you, like, uh, so many people got rich during COVID, and it was very dramatic what I saw in Uganda. Like, all of a sudden, once that COVID money started coming in from the CDC, the IMF, the World Bank, all these other agencies, the amount of SUVs on the road, honey, the amount of SUVs, um, and to be perfectly honest with you, cars are more expensive here.
Really?
They're taxed heavily, the shipping, all of that. So people are paying cash for Range Rovers, for big body Benzes, for yeah.
So that to me that says you talk about like loyalty and different things like that. You are willing, for a paper, because essentially that's what it is. It's paper. You're willing to sell off bloodlines for pieces of paper. And that's just really unfortunate. But, again, America is a capitalist society. Different countries are capitalist societies. So they put more value into money and things than they do life. I think people are struggling right now to value life. And that's why we see so many kidnappings and killings and different things like that, because people are not valuing life the way that they used to. And it's unfortunate. It's sad.
Mm.
So with your
Yeah.
experience over there, though, so this is Vaughn. He's a classmate, but he's also a relative. He's one of your cousins. That
Really? Oh,
yes.
Vaughn,
So
hi.
so I talked to him. This is we'll talk about offline, but beforehand, and so uh, this leads to the conversation. When did you decide to live abroad? Because this is one of the questions we had, and why, and then how's your experience being over there ever since you left?
Okay, so I will say that earlier in the conversation, I said that I was an African Studies minor, and I was at Indiana University in the early to mid 90s.
Yeah.
So at that point, that's when I knew I wanted to work abroad. And then when I went to school at the University of Ghana, and at that point, that's when I knew I wanted to live abroad. Like, one thing about travel is that it keeps you present. And, Eckhart Tolle and other spiritual gurus, if you will, they talk about living in the past and how that's depression, living in the future, but you need to stay present. And I think that's why people, hey, hey, I think that's why people love traveling so much. So I decided very early on, like before I was 21, that I wanted to live abroad. And my first time coming to Africa, I was 18,
Hmm.
and I was a volunteer at Chirezi Refugee Camp. I think I need to charge my computer. So y'all hold on just a second. I shall be right back.
All right. So I see Vaughn said, why did she decide to move abroad? I think it's very interesting because a lot of more people are asking about um, leaving the United States. I know we've heard some people talk about it over the years, but not as many that's currently speaking about it and just wanting that change. I think there's a classmate of ours who lives in, where does she live? I think
You
it's
talking about Latanda? Yeah, Latanda's over there now.
Latonda, and also Kimberly. You remember Kimberly? Kimberly lives. She doesn't live in
Oh,
Africa.
right. You are absolutely right. Bayvon. Yep, you're
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah,
right.
she lives over there. And we're just talking about a couple of our classmates. One of our two, live in a different country, and she was actually a nurse, I believe, in the United States. And when she moved, I don't know if it's Thailand, she lives somewhere, but she oftentimes talk about on her story that she lives in Bangkok. Thanks, Mon. Well, she lives in Bangkok. And hi, Kimberly, if you're watching this, how her anxiety and her stress tremendously went down because when she lived in the States, like everything was just like, hurry up and go, hurry up and do this and hurry up and do that. And oftentimes we know that even in working as a nurse, it's very stressful because you're in patient care and sometimes you can't take a lunch, you can't go to the restroom, you have people who are your bosses that's micromanaging. If there's not micromanagement, there's microaggression. And so she is living her best life in Bangkok. I will say that. So,
Mhm.
but just to follow up, Bob was asking, why did you decide to move abroad? And what does that look
Um, Okay, so I've always had an interest in Africa. I've always felt a connection to Africa. I've never really wanted to live anywhere else. I did have a brief stint when I lived in Spain. I lived in Madrid and Mallorca, Spain. Um, but what for me personally, I have a very adventurous spirit. And I was raised in an international environment. I grew up in Southern California around predominantly Spanish speakers from Central America, Mexico, and yeah, Central America and Mexico predominantly. So, growing up in that type of environment, it just opens you up. And, once I got my first taste of traveling abroad, it was like, okay, I like this. I like, being out of my comfort zone to a certain extent. I like meeting different people, hearing different languages, trying different foods, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I always knew that I wanted to work in international development or international human rights law. And at a certain point, I was like, okay, I'm going to be an ambassador to an African nation in my young naivete college student era. And then I realized, like, oh, US foreign policy is some bullshit. I can never do that. But that didn't stop me from continuing to work abroad and then ultimately live abroad. So this was like 2018, 2017. I took a trip to Zanzibar, Tanzania for my birthday. Loved it. And whenever you go someplace fabulous, you try to figure out, like, how can I make this my everyday
Mhm.
situation? And I tried a couple of things, didn't work. And then I got laid off from my job. So that was a shock because I was a very high performer and they told me that my job would be safe. And so after that, I was kind of half assed looking for work. And then I realized I don't want more of the same. And that's when I said, I'm going to take this unemployment insurance, I'm going to take this severance check, and I'm going to move my black ass to Zanzibar, Tanzania. And that's what I did. And Zanzibar was supposed to be my forever home. And then just life turned out differently. I had an opportunity in Uganda, and then ultimately, Kenya is my home for the foreseeable future. Vaughn, did I answer your question?
Okay, so people who are actually really thinking about transitioning and moving to another country, I know oftentimes it can be scary for some. What is some advice that you can give them?
Well, I do consultations for people who want to Blaxit to Africa. And my approach is different now than when I first started. And what I've realized is that the city is not meant for everybody. Like one of my clients, she grew up in a small town in Ohio. She's Nigerian American. She moved to Nairobi. Nairobi is a metropolis, and so it hasn't been a good fit for her. And then also realizing that, I used to say, well, there's 54 countries in Africa, choose one. But Africa's not for everybody. It really just depends on what you're looking for. So if I were to have a heart to heart with someone, if they were my client, I would say write a list of your top 5 non-negotiables and then seek out a country that offers that. For instance, if you want to live off grid and you want, your own farm, et cetera, Africa is the place for you. You can do that. You can do that relatively inexpensively. I think, Eugene, can I call you Eugene on here, or is that a
Yes,
no?
yeah, just
I can. Okay. So right now, $1 is equal to 130 Kenyan shillings. We do have a lot of inflation, but your USD will go a very long way. You know, the United States is the wealthiest country in the world. We don't really distribute that wealth the way we should, but
Hmm.
you know, that dollar speaks volumes. In Nigeria, okay, $1 is equal to 1,582 naira. Shit is super cheap out there. You know, housing, buying a house can be expensive, but you talk about your everyday like food, you know, beauty, maintenance, stuff like that. Like, yeah. But what I know is that if you are someone who relies on the internet, if you are someone who works from home and you need fast speed internet, you are going to be relegated to certain countries and in certain cities and towns within those countries. You know what I'm saying? Like I tried to work online, doing online teaching in Uganda. And hey, Tasha. Oh
Cuz
my God.
comes up out
All
of
these
nowhere,
people on here
right?
I ain't never met before.
I
It's
told you. We
wow.
have a huge family over there side. What's up, cuz?
You know. Um, I have to get a screenshot of this. That's crazy. Um, this is crazy. You know, what was I saying? Okay. So I tried to do online teaching in Uganda. The power, the electricity was off and on. So imagine you trying to pass a test and then the lights just go dark, fail. Then, you know, the Wi-Fi wasn't fast enough.
Mm.
So that's a reality here, unfortunately. I just did a podcast episode about my experience for living for 1 month in Nigeria. There's no way. I don't know how people work online in Nigeria with a power situation being so terrible. So, you know, like I said, to reiterate, make a list of your top 5 non negotiables and then go where you believe your heart will sing the loudest. One of my closest friends here in Kenya, she just left. She moved her family to Thailand. She had,
Mm.
yeah. So, you know, I feel very at home here as a person of African descent. You know, I don't have to deal with the microaggressions and all of that. You know, all of these toxins that your body releases to protect itself
Mhm.
from predators. We live that 24/7 in the United States. And so, one of the things that I continuously hear, especially from Black men that have left the US, is that they feel safe.
Mm.
And it's something they've never felt before.
And I would like to segue that point because uh, we've had conversations with it. It's been hilarious, and some have not been. But it's particularly surrounding Black men. And so the question is, and this is one of your podcast topics: how is dating life over in Africa?
Uh, uh.
Well,
Wow.
better
I want to
question:
be
Why is it different
careful.
versus American men of African descent versus men of African descent from the continent? Similarities,
Okay,
differences.
let me just start from this space. I'm 50. Okay. So my experience is going to be different from, yes, my experience is going to be different. I'm a Gen X. So, you know, dating at 50, dating in my late 40s, it's going to be different for most people. I'm also a divorcee. Um, so what I can say about dating in Africa is that people marry very early. And, you know, it's a lot of pressure to get married and have children right away. So most people are married.
Mm,
So now, you know, I'm a middle-aged woman and my dating pool is like early 30s.
really?
I don't have a lot of patience for BS. And also, East Africa is a very patriarchal society, very patriarchal. So, yeah, I like in Uganda, for instance, you kneel. Women and children kneel in front of men. You kneel for your husband. Your husband is out till 3 in the morning. You are not supposed to go to sleep. Your food, his food need to be hot and ready when he get home, and you need to kneel in front of him. Like it's so, when people would approach me, I'm like, I don't even know why you looking at me because I'm not gonna do nothing you say. And I got my own. You know what I'm saying? So then there's a lot of Europeans in Africa. People sleep like you think you're going to, leave those other people behind and come to Africa and just be around us. No, no, no. It's a lot of them here, and they're from Europe, and they take advantage. And honestly, it's African Americans is taking advantage as well.
Hmm.
So, my dating experience has been interesting, dating younger men and even like dating older men who are not evolved. Like most of the guys that I have dated since I've been in Kenya have been African American and they've been around about my age. But I will say that meeting somebody who on their healing journey, someone who's also like academically minded, someone who's also taking care of their physical form, that has been challenging. And then, I can't take the young boys seriously. So there was one point where I was in a polyamorous situation because, people kept telling me, Tadre, men have a lot of options here. And I was like, well, I got options too. So my response to that was like, I'm not finna, sit up here and get the short end of the stick. And I had me like African American guy, retired military, old, like he was like 3 years older than me. And I had me a younger dude, Kenyan. He was like 33, artist. You know what I'm saying? I did that for a little while until it just didn't work no more. And but I'm currently in a relationship now, and it's been interesting. It's been challenging. It's been beautiful because I've been single for so long. I was divorced in like 2008 is when I divorced. Yeah.
I heard you say that it is a struggle for you, and you said I'm not doing anything that they say. So we've oftentimes talked about submission on our podcast, and women I would say women of color in the United States, not all, let me not generalize, but they actually struggle with submission, especially again, we talk about leading by example, especially if it is someone who is not leading correctly, because it's hard for women to follow a male that's not leading properly or correctly. And so the whole kneeling to the men in Africa or staying, not going to sleep and staying up till 3 a.m., that would definitely be a struggle for women because it's hard for them to adjust here in the United States. So that looks very much differently. And my root is like is laughing so hard because you know, they go back and forth, what is submission? What does it look like? Is the person that I'm submitting to, are they a good leader? Or are they just trying to tell me, the blind leading the blind? Like, I can't let you drive me in the car if you don't know how to properly lead. So I know that was a very interesting topic.
The reason I'm laughing is because I'm picturing all the women that I know that surround me, and when you said kneeling, I could just imagine their faces like, "Are you serious?" Especially my
No.
wife. So yes,
And I don't want to paint like Ugandans as if like they living in the dark. I don't want to paint that picture because divorce is actually on the rise in Africa because women, especially women of means and women who've been having education and they've been educated abroad, like they're not going for the okie doke. And so yeah, the submission thing is real interesting. I look for me personally, I look at it from the standpoint of me and my partner, we're human. And he is really good at certain things, and I'm really good at certain things, and we don't have gender roles. And I don't need to submit to him. He doesn't need to submit to me. And, he's told me on a few occasions, like, please do not dim your light, because the light is what attracted him to me. Right. But then there's those people who are really insecure who are like, yeah, I was attracted to the light, but now I want you to dim it to fit into this relationship box. But yeah, as intelligent as women are, when I hear people talk about their daughters versus their sons, and how, girls just develop so much faster, why would you have to submit? Let's just be with each other. Let's just be in love and let's just grow together. I don't understand this submission piece at all.
I got a question. So we and it's the follow up the marriage question. So are there a lot of poly marriages in Africa? Because that's always been thrown around over here in the States. Like if you get an African man, he got like 8 wives somewhere. Remember the Martin and Gina episode
Mm.
when she was with the guy and he's like, "Oh, you'll be one of my wives" and all that. And so that's always made a joke, right? So how real is that? How tangible is that?
There's layers to it. I'm trying not to like generalize because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
want
yeah, yeah,
like my
yes,
African followers
yes,
to be like,
yes,
I don't want them to come for me. But what I will say is like it's interesting to be in a dating environment when you're dating someone whose dad may have had multiple wives
mm,
or whose grandfather had multiple wives. Like that still exists. So their mindset is shaped by this,
mm,
and then you asking them to stick to one woman, you know. Some people are really traumatized by that experience, growing up in that experience, because the wives fighting, people fighting over inheritance and da da da. And so they're like, no, I don't need multiples. But
Oh, wait, excuse
I would
me.
say that this generation right now, no, they're not doing multiples. But because everybody has one of these now, even the people in the village, um, folks is like exploring different lifestyles, and Africans are no exception.
mm.
I, I just want to follow up with that. Thank you very much, because we get the questions a lot here in the States, and they oftentimes you hear, well, if I was in Africa, I could have multiple wives and all of them would get along well. But as you just stated, even in
Mm.
Africa, having that amount of wives or um women, they still argue, they still fight, they fight over inheritance and things like that. That is also where the jealousy comes in. I don't know why people believe that just because you marry multiple people, that there is no form of conflict or confrontation. That's just being unrealistic.
Yeah, and I think too, like the expectations of men is different as well. Like this sister who is Ugandan, she was telling me that her dad, like, he just had kids everywhere. He was a philanderer. And but she was like, there was no expectation of him as a man to be monogamous.
Mm.
So what he was doing was not considered a bad thing. Um, but yeah, I think there's layers. It depends on the individual, and it depends on the culture, you know, the country.
But I do hear that you're saying that there is some form of generational trauma for the children that had to grow up in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, like the Hebrew Israelites are here as well.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
there's a community of Hebrew Israelites that are here, and they recently left Israel due to conflict and a change in foreign ministers, etc. And so they call it plural marriages. They believe in plural marriages, at least this sect does.
Hmm.
And what I've heard from them is like one, a couple of brothers like one woman is enough for me because they've been traumatized by their father's decisions. And the thing about having, plural marriages is that there's no way that you're tapped into all of your spouses emotionally. There's no way. Like one person is enough. Imagine you have to sit with three people's concerns, three people's aspirations, three people's disappointments. So when I lived in Zanzibar, Tanzania, which is a Muslim island, and they're a blend of people, etc. Like what you would see is okay. Like let me just think about my driver, my taxi driver. He was always trying to get in my pants. I'm like, listen, I just need you to drive. Just drive me. And sir, because he would say, oh, you're not jumping, because I lived in a small fishing village and everybody knew I was single and I lived by myself. And so it was just like, she ain't got no, I would hear people saying Swahili, she don't have no man. She live by herself. Like, so, he would drive me around and he would just be like, so you don't want to jump, you're not jumping, which is his word for sex. And I'm like, sir,
Oh, wow.
aren't you busy enough? He had like 8 wives. It
Oh
was just
man.
crazy. And then he had like umpteen kids. So I used to joke with him and I say, listen, I don't want no problems. I don't want nobody showing up at my door. And he's just like, no one's gonna come to the door, etc. But what they do, um, with the multiple wives, each wife will live in a different village. You
Oh,
see what I'm saying? To avoid that conflict.
wait. Yeah.
And what
Yeah.
they do is instead of that one man providing for all of those women, they start them off with seed money for businesses. So one wife, he'll give her money for her farm. The other wife will have money for her beauty salon. The other wife will have money for her little shop. So they're not all coming to him, getting in his pockets. You see what I'm saying? So that's how they work that out in Zanzibar. I don't know what they
Question.
do. Like every place is different.
So that just and then that's my sister, by the way. She asked, "How's the food over there?" So you can talk about that also. But one more question. So when you talk about the men who have multiple wives, are these quote affluent six-figure salary men, or are the so go ahead. Because I know for me, one is enough for me because and then we got three kids, so I'm like, that's crazy. I would never think to have, because I'm thinking of the money. I'm like, man, that's expensive.
Yeah, you can't be tapped in like that. And the men are supposed to stay with each wife for 1 week. You know what I'm saying? And what if you get to one wife's house and she beefing? I try to ask this guy, I'm like, what do you do? So do you just go to the other house because you don't have to be there? You know what I
Right,
mean? So
right.
I wasn't that close to Zanzibaris to know like the nitty gritty of what happens behind closed doors. But as far as like having multiple wives and being wealthy, the two do not have to exist together because of poverty and because, a woman is nothing without a man. She is nothing without children. So people get to a point where they're desperate and there'll be a third wife. But as far as like Gen Zs, millennials, they're not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think Gen X is doing that. I think that's the baby boomers, the silent generation before
Oh
them
wow.
that was doing that. I
Okay.
don't think, at least Not in East Africa. They not doing that. But then again, you have to think about the expectations of men in a patriarchal society. The Western world will tell you you have to be monogamous and faithful. Maybe the church might tell you that, but your indigenous culture may not be telling you that.
So I like to
That's
follow up with that. So
interesting.
my sister says, "How is the food?" So what's the differences in food preparation and just the food, just the ta- taste bud?
Texture.
Yes, how is the because I eat a lot of African food here and they're very spicy, and I'm like, ooh, Ethiopia food is very spicy. And so, can you talk about your experiences with the food and what food would you suggest as far as? Because I remember I like to add this. We were talking one day, and you were walking past food trucks, and I'm like, you said they got food. I'm like, what? They got food trucks? And so it's kind of identical to what we see over here. But go ahead.
Well, I would say that when I was in undergrad, they gave us a map of of the planet and the people who could eat spicy food and people who couldn't. Apparently, there's a gene. And East Africans, they don't do spicy food. The Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti,
Yeah.
they can do spice, right? The West Africa is too goddamn, it's too hot, you know. But here in East Africa, I'm gonna be real. I'm gonna keep it 100 and say that Kenyan cuisine is boring to me.
Mm,
Hmm.
Um, they use salt, they use pepper. Uganda, they primarily just boil their food with salt. So I don't think they really have the gene for spice because just like in the Caribbean, lots of Indians were brought here to work as indentured servants. And they brought all them spices and they still ain't caught on. You know what I'm saying? Like I went to a vision board party and this woman put a red pepper on her vision board because that year she wanted to try spice. Like that was on her vision board. So, Kenyans, their food, they're known for their nyama choma, which is barbecue. Sometimes it's spice, sometimes it isn't. But I will tell you the Swahili people who are on the coast, they are a blend of Bantu, Arabs, Persians, and Indians. Those people can throw down in Kenya.
mm,
Um, so it really depends on where you go. Like I was in Mozambique, I think it was last year, or last year I was in Mozambique. A lot of Portuguese influence.
mm,
Here in Kenya, there's a lot of Indian influence in the food. West Africa, you have lots of Lebanese influence. Like whoever was there colonizing and who migrated there, it's gonna be in the food.
mm,
So I know everybody like thinks like African cuisine, they eat a lot of insects. There are certain times of the year, like rainy season, where people will eat like roast, boil, fry grasshoppers, termites,
really?
caterpillars. Um, Not so much in the city, but then you meet people who grew up eating that stuff as a snack. And I've definitely had, what were they called in Zimbabwe? Like these dried caterpillars, and they're salted. Good.
Mm,
But I've also had like escargot in Paris. So, the US, we don't really have an insect eating culture. You know
no.
what I'm saying? But it is a good source of protein. I will also say that in cities, there's a plethora of restaurants. So I could have any type of Asian, Latin American, any day of the week. What I will say is that like good Mexican food is hard to come by
Mm,
and it's expensive.
mm,
We used to dollar tacos.
right.
Here you get like, was it 1400? So that might be like $10 for two little tacos.
Good.
Hmm. I do have a couple questions for you. Thank you for the update. How is fresh water? Running water, fresh water. How is it there? And then also medical care. What does that look like?
Yep.
So in Kenya, and also, I'll just say in Nairobi, the water's fine. I do have a filter on my kitchen tap. Um, you asked about the water and and the medical care. The medical care for people who have means is amazing. It's private, and you're getting some of the best doctors. In fact, in East Africa, people come to Kenya specifically for medical care. I even did an episode on this, but what I would tell you is that if you have a very specific medical needs, that should be in your top 5, and you need to research and find out, do they have the capabilities to treat this particular need in this country? But generally speaking, it's very good here in Kenya, and I don't have any particular medical issues, to be honest with you.
Okay. So
And
another question.
here in Kenya versus the U.S., one of the things that I love about being here is that I'm seen and I'm heard. So when I go to the doctor in the US, it's like 3 minutes. They not listening to me. Um, I before I let my hair go gray, like they're like, oh, you're too young to be experiencing this. I'm like, have you looked at my chart? You know what I'm saying? So um that's the one thing, like we know that the mortality rates of black mothers in the US is very, very high. It's very
Mhm.
low here because the doctors look like you and they care about you and they know how you should be delivering. That it's a different level of care and concern for your well-being.
That and we had a while, I don't know if you were privy to it, but a while ago we had a nursing student, or I think she had not been declared a nursing student yet, but she went to Indiana State University. And there was a whole video that was actually going around. And it was quite racist about how she truly felt about black black people in general. So if she actually got into the nursing program and was one of the nurses that started to care for black people, a lot of times the way you truly feel will come out in your work. And so that's another concern as to what it looks like when people go into these fields and they're caring for people of color and you necessarily don't care about that race. And so that plays a part in it as well. You have people in these different industries who are racist and who are prejudiced, and they are giving care, whether it is like law enforcement, social services, nursing, doctors and lawyers and things like that. And the way that they actually feel before they go to work is still the way they feel when they go to work. So that portray, it comes across in how they're taking care of you or the lack of care. So that makes sense.
And the other thing that I will mention, thank you so much, Candace, for saying that. Um, the other thing while we're on this topic is, my, the care that my mom was receiving as someone who has dementia, as someone who was living off of her Social Security, there's miles of difference between how she was treated in the US versus how she's treated here. My mother is here with me. They don't really have a culture of putting their elders in nursing homes, although that is changing, because you'll find that a grandmother, her kids will be all over the world living, right? They'll be in Europe, they'll be in the US working. Their culture is more of, once you reach a certain age, you're supposed to go to the village and look after them chickens and goats. And then you have like a distant cousin that's looking after you, feeding you, but that's not good enough care. So I would just say that the medical care that my mother's received, how they revere elders here, has really made a difference in how she's been treated. And I feel so much better having her here versus in the States, where she was just like mistreated. And like she was arrested because she was driving without her license.
Hmm?
You
How old
don't
is
need to arrest no old lady. You know what I'm saying? Just
Yeah.
like, ma'am,
Yeah.
come on, we gonna take you home. We somebody needs to come get this car.
Yeah.
Like just
But
crazy.
and that's just another thing. If they ran her plates and she did not have her license in her purse, don't they, once they run your plates, don't they have your license number and know that it's valid?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Very interesting. We actually went to, this is one of our classmates. She questioned, I know in 2017 Kenya had the highest sexual assault rate in Africa per worldwide labor conference. What do you say? How do you speak to that? And also I have a follow-up for that as well.
Wow, that's saying a lot because I would have thought it would have been South Africa.
Mm.
Um, that has not impacted me personally, but then I don't live in a low income neighborhood. So here they use British English and they use the word slums, right? My housekeeper, she lives adjacent to a slum. We call it ghettos, informal settlements in Brazil. What do they call them? Favelas. So they're informal settlements. Um, and even here, like right across the road from the White House, the State House, there's a slum. So these people who service all of these homes, if they live far away, they'll set up a house in a slum made of like tin roofing or whatever. Their reality is very different from mine. And it's unfortunate, like I said, it's a very patriarchal society. Um, and I could see that playing out in the slums. The police brutality, I don't have to worry about because, I'm living an upper middle class lifestyle in a nice neighborhood. But I believe what I've heard is that in the slums, they get beat. The police is beating them down. And during COVID too, if you were out past your curfew, like they have these really long sticks, like made of hard rubber, the way they will beat you, you know.
And so I just to follow up, if we're comparing apples to oranges, so they talked about, sexual assault. What I've been seeing here in the United States, and maybe Amaru can speak to that as well, we've had a lot of, allegedly, a lot of news that has been coming out about Hollywood actors, actresses, people in the rap industry, entertainment industry, and there's a lot of things that have been coming out about sexual assault as well, kidnapping, sex trafficking, and all these other things. And so it's happening here in the United States as well. It's just not talked about as much. So in comparison, how would you say? Would you believe that it's about the same or it is more in Kenya?
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't be out in the streets like that. I don't interact like I haven't had that experience personally, and nobody has come to me to tell me about those experiences. Um, I know that they do discuss um, American pop culture on these radio programs here, these morning radio shows. And last time I checked, they thought it was laughable. Like what was going on with R. Kelly, like they just thought it was laughable. They were still playing R. Kelly, you know. What's another thing? And they think Trump is laughable. Because they don't have to live under Trump. They don't have to deal with the backlash of these racist conservatives. So they think it's entertaining. But as far as like what's happening here, comparing to what's going on in the US, I'm just not in those circles to know.
We have a question from your cousin. She says, so police brutality exists there too. So there is police brutality in Kenya as well.
It does. Like I haven't been subject to it because it's a classist thing, right? They look at me and they would think like, oh, okay, she's connected. She knows people. You know what I'm saying? I could lose my job if I fuck with her. But let's say my housekeeper, or my motorcycle taxi ride driver, I'm sure it's a very different story for them.
And I hear you talk about classism. That actually was my next question. Do you feel that it is more of race relations, where it is by color, culture, or is it classism by the amount of money that you actually make?
And that would go
Yes,
along with this question I had too. So go ahead.
definitely very classist. The way I've seen moneyed Africans treat service providers is just like it's abhorrent. And but there's also what they call tribalism.
Mm-hmm.
There's that too. We have to remember that these borders are very, very new. And so, there was Maasai land and there's Kikuyu land and now all of these people, because of these colonial powers, are living under one rule in one land. And so there is tribalism for sure. But one of the things that is probably irresponsible for me to say, but I will say that it is so refreshing to be somewhere and not have to deal with the tribalism. Because what we deal with in the US, we can call it racism, we can call it a caste system, but it's tribalism. It's
Yes.
black against white, against
Yes.
indigenous, against Latin, against Asian. That's tribalism. We could call it racism, but in Africa, people want to call it like tribalism. So being here, like I don't belong to any of these tribes. So I don't have to deal with the politics. And having grown up in the US, it's just refreshing to not have to, when I was in Uganda, they would be like, what tribe are you? And I'm like, I'm African American, and then you got to explain what that is. And
Is
then
that
they,
even real?
what?
African American, is that even real? That's my sarcasm.
Oh,
I'm just asking.
Oh, it's interesting because they'll be like, "Oh, so that means you are nigga," and I'm like, "Hold up."
Oh
Like,
man.
what I'm saying? But they get American rap and stuff, and so I would get frustrated because it's like, y'all know who Michael Jackson is and Kobe Bryant and Oprah Winfrey, but you don't associate me with those people. You know what I mean? And sometimes I would just tell people like I'm a descendant of those who were stolen. And
Mm.
nobody wants to talk about slavery because slavery, East African slave trade was serious.
Mhm.
And then sometimes people would literally like laugh in my face. And I'm like, what is so funny about that? Oh, I'm sorry. I've just never heard anybody say it like that. So sometimes, I have to educate people a little bit. But Nairobi is such a hub for all of these international corporations, like Chase Bank is here, and
Really?
organizations
Okay.
that I don't have to explain, you know. Um, but what's interesting in
It makes
Uganda.
sense that Chase would be there because Chase benefited off of slavery.
You are absolutely right. Yes.
What country didn't benefit? You know what I'm saying? So what was interesting about being in Uganda was that I look like the people from the ruling tribe. Museveni's people, what were they? They're from Western Uganda. I look like those people. So when there were political tensions, I would just see people mean mugging me, you know what I mean? And I'm just like, listen, I'm not that. You know? That's not me.
Question I
Yes.
have. Um, I remember we were talking. This is early on, and you were saying like they
Wait,
had.
cousin, wait. You said something about black. I didn't read the
Oh,
question.
oh yeah. Let's go back. Let's go back. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So talk about the word black
Oh,
and why Africans don't like it.
oh,
Because that was one of your topics. Remember, I watched. I watched.
right. Okay. So I would say because of this and the internet, that people identify more, let's say Gen X, millennials, Gen Zs identify more with the term black than, let's say, their parents, their baby boomer parents.
Mm.
But what is the priority in terms of self identification is your tribe, your clan, who your daddy is, your gender. So when we were on the continent, we were Igbo, we were Yoruba, we were
Ooh,
Twi, we were Ga.
yeah,
And it's not until other people came that they started calling us black. That wasn't something that we claimed for ourselves. Like Zanzibar means land of the blacks in Arabic.
yes.
So
Teach.
that's the connection that as African Americans we have to make, and then I've seen like where some Africans from the Horn of Africa, some Somalis, Ethiopians, they don't even claim black, they don't claim Africa. That's conditioning, right? But then you'll hear some Ethiopians like, first of all, we the original black, you know. So yeah. But when I talk to my dad about his experience with Africans, he's had a very negative experience.
Mm.
Coming, up in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, when Africans was leaving Africa, coming to school in North America. And according to him, they was shitting on him and just telling him like, y'all not black, y'all not us. I think that has more to do with jealousy than reality. We these Africans today, this younger generation, they see the connection.
So I have a question for you. Oftentimes, again, not all, but I hear a lot. Some Africans will go with the stereotype of African Americans are lazy. How do you speak to
Mm.
that?
Ooh, I think overall, we have to look at the situation like this. You got Africans that, let's say, will leave a country like Nigeria and then go to the United States and say it's a land of milk and honey. And I compare it to being in an abusive relationship.
Mm.
You're going from your partner locking you in the basement and not feeding you to your partner occasionally cussing you out. There's a big difference there, right? You would definitely trade for getting cussed out every now and then to being locked in the basement with no food. So, when people leave that very abusive relationship that they have with their country and come to the US where there are jobs, then it does seem like, oh, you people are lazy. But the reality is that we are not. We are very hardworking people, et cetera, et cetera. And to explain that to somebody who's coming from a very abusive situation, there is no explaining it. You in a healthy relationship, you got little issues here and there, but then you having a conversation with your friend that's getting their ass beat on a regular basis. Your relationship looks amazing through their eyes.
Mhm.
And then, like, I don't even understand how they be latching on to this conservative media. Like, my neighbor in Uganda, he was listening to like Rush Limbaugh and stuff, and he would just like pull up and he would open a car door and I would just hear all of this American talk radio coming out. It was all this conservative.
I think she froze up.
Yeah, she probably doesn't know it now. Well, your sister had a question. She's basically asking the same question: why do Africans hate African Americans? And I'll let your cousin speak to it. But from my perspective, after talking with them, they don't believe that African Americans are African. They really believe that it is like watered down, mixed down, and so they don't really associate. And not all of them, but like your cousin was saying, they don't see the association between. If it was maybe 50s and 60s, they don't see the association between their culture and our culture. So it's really different, and they all don't. All of them don't believe that way.
The ones that do, um, and I've run into a bunch of them. I understand because uh, they look at it, and I don't think it's right, but they look at it like this. They look at it like, okay, you guys have all these resources available, um, free education, obviously going to college, but you get free education when you're in high school. Work your tail off. You can also obtain free scholarship for college education, right? And then take that knowledge and then build your own business, work for someone, whatever, what may have you. And so they're like, why aren't you taking advantage of that when they come over here, right? Tax free, right? Some of them tax free, but they come over here, they kind of get in like Kenny and his brothers, right? So you see some of that, like, and I understand, and I always go back to slavery. I always going back to we being pulled from our motherland, being here. Here she's back now, but I'll let her
Okay.
answer.
What
Okay.
happened?
I think you just lost your connection.
It was like this.
Yeah, you were frozen and you lost your connection. We were just kind of following up on a question, but we'll actually let you answer it. But also in addition to that, I remember I'll follow up with that. But redlining, we had a lot of redlining, a lot of you know the slavery act, Jim Crow, and all of those things. So LaDonna basically is asking, why do Africans hate African Americans?
That's not correct. I don't know. I've never encountered. I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna be responsible and say that that has not been my reality. However, I have had men, specifically black men, tell me like they have been dissed by other Africans, and I think that that's jealousy. You know, African American men are very beautiful and just you got it,
Hey,
and I can spot us from a mile away. You walk into a room, everybody knows you're there. There's a presence that you command, there's a confidence that you have. And I think that some people can be intimidated by that.
some people think that's arrogance, but no, it's confidence, and I'm glad you said that. But over here, that was my sister, so that's my baby sister that was at the party. But she was asking because me and her talk about it all the time, and that was my response before you got back on. Was that in my experiences with them, I'm Ariam, my guy Jabril, uh, Kenny, right? They have come from the continent over here. It was a guy that I worked with at UW Milwaukee, and their whole sentiment was, you know, we come to the United States for opportunity, right? And so they look at the masses of the black people here. I always say African descent now, but the masses of people of African descent, and they're like, okay, if we could come over there, get free education, get our GPA is high enough, grades high enough for us to obtain free college education, take that college education and then turn it into a business or work for someone, what is your excuse? And I always talk to her about this. I said, well, that's why we work harder because that's what slavery did to our mindset. You can turn on the TV and see some of the traumas that we're going through, especially with social media. Our women exploited themselves, the men exploited themselves. With impoverished, being identified. I hate when our own people identify ourselves with poverty. Like that drives me nuts. But it's some of those, and I think those are some of the ill effects of slavery. some of the ill effects of racism, Jim Crow. So the drug trade, right? But also it's kind of you got all those things on top of each other. Not saying that the Africans that come over here don't deal with some of those same things, but it's at a different level here because you can't turn like we were just talking about an hour ago. One of her friends, and then you talk police brutality. One of her friends she went to high school with got gunned down at the RNC event last week. 37 got shot 37 times. So we see all of this stuff and it's thrown daily, right? And so that's why platforms like yours exist and like this exists to show the other side of those things. But I think that's a lot of their frustrations because they like, well, what's y'all excuse? And I'm like, I always have to temper it like, well, you got to understand, yes, you probably went through the same things, but being here is at a different level because, your institutions, they're whitewashing institutions and towns and stuff. Some of the stuff they've done is crazy. But,
And
we as a people haven't moved past that. We're still at stage one. So, and that's a lot of our people, not generalizing, not trying to generalize that at all, but from what I've seen, it's a lot of our people.
And in addition to that, I believe that oftentimes the media and the government
Yes.
has a way of portraying um, blackness as they give it the face of criminalism, basically. And then they oftentimes talk about black people as being the most violent people in the United States when we know that's not true. America was essentially built on violence. I mean, they have set the tone for violence. And so oftentimes when I hear that, I'm saying if you are suggesting that black people are the most violent people, they've learned from you all.
Yes.
So we have to begin to everybody has to begin to take accountability for their part that they played in creating such violence and such, what they call it, ghetto communities and different things like that. You have to be accountable for the things that you actually set in motion, and you have to quit saying that black people are violent, or oftentimes you hear them say, oh, they're acting like animals, when realistically they were shown that by you.
Yes, very good point. The narrative that is put out about Black people is very derogatory and inaccurate. And one of the things, like, people are so shocked, Africans are so shocked to find out that we are only 12% of the population.
Mhm.
They think that we are the majority because of the media that they get. All the reality TV shows, Housewives, this, that, and the third is here. And so, what's really unfortunate about that narrative is that they think we're all like that. I
Yeah.
went to some sort of like women's discussion, and this Ugandan woman was like, "Oh, my new favorite thing is to watch ratchet TV and listen to ratchet music." Like she loved it, right? And she's an upper class money Ugandan woman. So there's that narrative, right? Also, I spoke about this. Being here as an American is very different from me being in the United States as an American. I am treated better here by Asians, by white people than Africans on the continent. Just like when they come to the US, they're treated better in the US. I went home in October, and I was telling people that I'm coming from Kenya. I didn't say I was Kenyan. I said I'm coming from Kenya. The way people's whole vibe changed towards me, they were much more interested in what I was saying. They were kinder to me, etc., etc. And I can exist in this country and not get involved in politics, just like they can come to the US and get their money up and not get involved in the politics, right? My boda is like a motorcycle taxi. He's asking me like, I want to go to the US. How can I do that? I just told him, I said, are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
good. I know it's frozen. I told him, I said, just go and make your money and keep your mind, stay out of the politics. And he's like, without a doubt. Without a doubt. The other thing I want to say is that the narrative is that we're all poor and criminals, like you said, Candace, right?
yeah.
But 30% of Black people live in poverty, at the poverty level or below. 30%. That's still a high number, but that's not the majority. And
No,
I
it's not.
literally was going back and forth with this African American guy who was intelligent. And he was like, no, 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 we just can't get it together. We're all in poverty. And I gave him the statistic, and he was just shocked. His whole life, he had believed that narrative. The other thing is, like, I actually was engaged to a Cameroonian American, and he basically was raised in the DMV area. And I happily broke off that engagement because he didn't have respect for African Americans. His parents had come over when they were students. They had, done well for themselves. And he kept talking about the dysfunction of Black Americans. And I was like, hold up, you're talking about class differences.
Right,
That's
right,
not me. That's
right.
not the people that I know. You can't lump all of us into the Black underclass. And because he didn't see how we had paved the way for people like him to be able to come to the United States and thrive, I happily broke that shit off. I was like, we cannot, because you have to respect my culture the way I'm going to respect yours. And so when I hear
Absolutely.
Africans talk about the dysfunction, I'm like, you're talking about class differences. Y'all got that shit going on too.
Yep. My wife says it all the time. Every culture has a subculture, and
Oh, absolutely.
they all have the lower levels, right? Every culture has that, but it seems like ours gets programmed and blasted everywhere versus others' cultures, and so that drives me nuts because, like you said, we are we are the minority here, 13%. If we think about numbers wise, there's another 87% of other cultures. So if they're only showing you the 13%, we are not all poor. Like I don't that drives me crazy. And so like I see people they'll be like, well, like when let's say our people do come together and organize something, right? And a lot of people don't show up, but we have people who sponsor it, right? And the people like people need to understand people sometimes who donate money, who sponsor, they don't always want their name attached to it, right? But they'll be
Mm.
some prominent organization or some prominent real estate developer or some prominent just entrepreneur, right? But I know a lot of these people. And so it's like, no, you're telling, you're I think my sister said it. It's what white people view us as. When you hear black people spewing white people narratives, that also drives me crazy because you don't know what you're talking about. Like you really don't. And so, like, I thank you for that because it be our own people. It be our own people, but they don't care about nothing about black people. You don't know
It's
that.
conditioning.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes,
And so this sis says the Africans in our braid shops do not like us. LOL. That's jealousy.
yeah,
I mean, like I said, we intimidate so much. The thing about us, where African Americans are winning in the diaspora, and not even just African Americans, like Caribbeans, those of us in the diaspora, where we are winning is that we not taking no shit off white people.
Say that
Just
again.
not.
Say it again. Say it again, please.
Like we've been to hell and back. And like my girlfriend, my Kenyan girlfriend told me, she was like, we are uncomfortable in our Africanness
Yep.
because the colonization was real,
Yep.
right? Um, but like I lived in DC for 13 years, and African Americans and Ethiopians, like we were like oil and water. And it was just like, why don't they fuck with us like that? Why all of this? And I had several Ethiopian men and women tell us it's just jealousy. We're intimidated. Like,
Mm.
look in the mirror. You know what I'm saying? And see how you're confident in your being and all of that. It's just jealousy. You
Mm.
know, the way people used to ask me, like, what do you put in your hair? You know what I'm saying? Like to get it like this, it's like it grows out like this, you
Mhm.
know. Um, Or what are you using on your skin, which that's code for what bleaching creams are you using.
Mm,
So because the world is on this more proximate, you're more beautiful the more proximate you are to whiteness. um, so many of us are closer to the standard, and they want to get there,
mm.
but that really don't have nothing to do with us. And so sometimes that gets taken out on us.
Now, I do want to speak to LaDonna. LaDonna, you said that the Africans in the braid shop don't like you. I want to tell the Black men and women, or when people in general, you have to be more intentional about your dollar. If you are going to any place, any business, I don't care what business it is, whether it is predominantly Black owned, white owned, Indian owned, Asian owned, if you're going somewhere and they are not giving you great service, stop spending your money with them. Be intentional about your dollar, because we oftentimes will go spend money with people who do not like us, who do not value us. And at the end of the day, they're giving you a service, but is it great service? If they do not like you, stop spending your money with them. Period.
And I like to, because I know we got to wind down. Because yes, she is 8 hours ahead of us, so it's 7:30. Eight is it 8:30? Is it 8:30? 8:30 her time. I would like for you to share the story. You probably forgot about it. The story about how you were walking. You said you were walking all the time past the barbershop, and the guy would be outside and never spoke to you. And then, could you share that story? I think that was my essence of being in the motherland. When you told me that story, it gave me goosebumps. But could you share that story, please?
Oh yeah. Okay. So I was an undergrad. I was at the University of Ghana, and for those of you who've been to Ghana, I was in the Osu neighborhood, which is like a nice little poppin' neighborhood. And every time I would walk by this shop, the shopkeeper would not speak to me when I spoke to him. It was like I, I didn't exist, or I was just like really irritating him by speaking to him. And it was that point in my life where I decided to cut my hair off and go natural. So first, I had to convince the barbers to cut my hair, like they refused. But when they finally did, I literally felt like I was floating on air. Like I was just walk. I felt so free. And I walked past the same man's shop, and he called me in his shop. He was like, "You come in here, come in here." And I was like, "Oh, now he want to speak." And then he gathered all the women that was working for him, and he was like, "This is how a woman should look." And I was like, "Whoa." Because unfortunately, I want to delve into this more, but from a place of love. It's a lot of bleaching happening in Africa, not just Africa, Asia, and the Arab world, of course. But we talking about Black folks now. It's a lot of bleaching happening. The wigs, the weaves. Like I was in Nigeria February to March. If you not bleaching in Nigeria and you don't have no lace front, like what are you doing with your life? Like just what are you doing with your life? There's no respect for you. Your social currency is low. Like, yeah. So there was that happening. And you know, I guess he wanted me to be an example.
Hmm. Very, very interesting.
Well, we enjoyed this conversation. We know Auntie got to go lay down
Oh, we
because
gotta do our
it's
word of the day before we
What?
end.
Oh,
Let's do
go
our
ahead.
word
Go
of
ahead.
the day and then we can
Let's
end.
do it.
Yes.
And then when we end, we'll also give taglines to where people can reach you because obviously you are a great person to be have access to. Let's see, where are we? Yes, I don't forget. I didn't get caught up in. Here we go. Uh, the word of the day is Exodus, and the Swahili version is Kutoka, which is a mass departure of people. And I've always said, I'm always in those spaces where people always like, let's just go move somewhere in the United States, and I'm like, No, if I'm going to move somewhere with a massive amount of people, I want to go back home. I want to do a kutoka, right? I want to go back and move like Marcus Garvey was talking about. Let's get away from here, because you're only gonna get so much, right? It's their country. Well, technically, let's be honest, it's really not their country. They took this country from the indigenous people, right? But they have their laws, regulations, policies, everything, right? And so you're only gonna get so far here, right? If I'm gonna be restricted by people, I'd rather go back home and be restricted, if that makes sense. And so that is where that conversation is at.
I'm enjoying the conversation. Do you guys have anything you want to ask me before I go?
I do. I have one last question. Amaru saying that he would rather go back to go back to Africa versus being in the United States. I believe that a lot of times people don't move or take that big leap of faith because they're frightened because they were born in the United States. But all I say is that we've been so low here in the United States, is nowhere else to go but up. And so, what would you say in comparison to living in the United States versus living in Africa and people who are still fearful at this time?
Oh, thank you for that question. That's a really good question. I saw a post that was saying that, basically the American imperialism is global. And so to think that you are going to leave the United States and be able to escape the tyranny of the United States is foolish. But I think that notion is foolish. Like there's being in the fire and there's being in the frying pan. And as a person of African descent in the United States, you in the fire. You know what I'm saying? You in the fire constantly, which is why our telomeres are shorter, which is why we die earlier, et cetera, et cetera. So for me as an introvert with a very small family, it's a no-brainer for me to be in Africa. But I have seen people who are extroverts, people who come from large families, they have a large social network. I have seen them struggle living abroad. But you won't know until you try it out, you know? So what I was telling Eugene for the longest, like, look, you ain't got to move over here, you know, 24/7, 365 days out of the year, but you can buy an investment property. You can build a vacation home, and come here a few months out of the year and experience that peace of mind. So compared to the United States, the cost of living is lower. The private health care is better for us. Um, I would say the pace of life is slower. So you do have time to like be social, to have a social life. Um, the food quality is better, it's fresher. These are things that matter to me. And it's nice to be able to blend in.
Also, Bill Gates creating food in labs over there?
Girl, you already know. You already know, like Monsanto is here in Kenya. Um, yeah, there is a difference. Like when I lived in Tanzania to Uganda to now Kenya, there's a difference in the food quality. Like in Tanzania, if I didn't eat my food in like 3 days, it was a wrap. So here, there's a lot more GMOs. So you have to be more conscious about where you're getting your food here. It's like that.
Well, I feel like this was a great show. I am very appreciative for you actually coming on, giving people insight of what it looks like to transition from one country to a continent.
Right.
So that's very interesting. I do want you to put your information and how people can contact you if they are thinking about moving abroad. I think that's really important. So I know Amaru had talked about it a while ago, that he and his family at some point were going to head over there. I as well wanted to come over. I know I spoke with you in 2022 about my transition. I still want to come. because I will definitely want to live abroad, and so I will be definitely in contact with you about my transition soon.
We was gonna
You are
come
both
early,
welcome.
early COVID when COVID happened. We were
Mm.
literally planning that, and then COVID happened, and so and then we got two little ones now. So my wife was like, I don't want you to get over, So she's like, who gonna watch these little rascals when we gone for 2 weeks? So we gotta strategize. But yes, I am eager to get over there because I remember you were showing pictures at was it Zanzibar, Tanzania, when you were on the beach and I'm looking at the water and the sand. I'm just like, oh my god! And I get goosebumps. I don't know why. I just get goosebumps. Anything related to being an African. So she is, as you guys know, she's dope. As you see for yourself, I got her YouTube channel scrolling across the line. If you want to get in contact with her, any information, I can, you can inbox me, call me, and I can relate her information to you. She is dope. If you want her back on, obviously we can request. Let us know. We may have you back on. But Auntie need to go to bed because it's late over there.
Right. My bedtime is 9 p.m.
Yeah, it's almost close. So, but we love you. Thank you so much. I know this is because you're very busy, very busy. She does a lot of freelance writing. She does a lot of stuff. So she is very powerful for our culture, for our people. I tag a lot of her stuff on our YouTube page, so you can reach her that way. She's also on Instagram, YouTube, so she's literally everywhere. But thank you so much. We love you. Get some rest. Kiss TT for me also, because I miss my TT. And also,
Thank
I
and you
miss
you.
see, we got all these cousins
anything. Thank
everywhere. We
you
got
so
cousins
much.
everywhere.
Oh my God. Listen, I blame my uncles. But y'all, my family that's on here that I've never met, please reach out to me. DM me. Because I want to meet you. Candace and Eugene, you guys have been great hosts. Thank you so much for being prepared and asking really insightful questions. I appreciate you both.
Thank you. And again, I love your hair.
Oh, thank you. Thank
All right, y'all. We'll see y'all on Tuesday.
Bye.
you.
Peace.
Bye.
Mhm.